Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Jaramillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted people in my network, friends, colleagues, collaborators. I want to get to the books that have impacted who they are, their leadership, their work, their business. So these are going to be great leads to get to those lessons, those values, whatever it is they take away from that book that we're covering. And this particular series, I cover three categories of books. The first one that they're sharing with me that I've never covered or read myself. A second category is a book that we've both read, whether specifically for the episode or one that we've read in our past lives before the series. And the third one is if they're the writer or the publisher of a book, just to share the lessons, what they want people to take away from the book that they're sharing, the book that they've put out. So for this episode, I am going to have an author, and my guest is Nika Anani. Nika is an international award-winning entrepreneur, succession specialist, and legacy planning expert for future-focused business families. She's on a mission to help businesses move from lifetime to legacy such that they build family enterprises of the future. With over a decade of family enterprise expertise in Nigeria, Nika helps owners lead their family organizations to long term legacy and impact. Her inside experience as a second generation family business owner and family office pioneer birthed a passion to help other families to build enterprises that would outlive them. Nika is the author of Lifetime to Legacy, a new vision for multi-generation family businesses, which I just asked her. Nika will be out on the 21st of this month. Okay, I just want to put that out there so people know it's an upcoming book. She's also the co-founder of African Family Firms, a Pan-African association of family businesses that is focused on promoting generational wealth and generational legacies on the African continent. And she's also the host of the Connected Generation podcast, a top 10 family business podcast globally that is dedicated to next gens that are seeking how to navigate building generational enterprises while leaving an impact. And I was lucky enough to meet Nika through a mutual colleague and friend of ours, Keisha Zulu, who I interviewed for episode 25 of this series, where we covered Who Moved My Cheese. So I'm lucky that this series, I just keep meeting people in this expanding network. Luckily, people see the kind of vision and idea that I have for this podcast and introduce me to great people like Nika and the great work that she's doing. So Nika, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Sean, for having me. I'm really excited about our conversation.
So when I read your profile initially, I was like, what? I never thought about what it would mean to do this kind of work.
Mm,
So I'm fascinated just by because I don't even think people are good at sharing today who they are, much less think about the future, especially when it comes to even if something is on the line like a business. So can you give us a little more about what it is you do today? Who are you today? How is it you deliver that for your clients, your customers, your audience?
that's a really good question. I'm a succession specialist. I help business owners take their businesses from lifetime to legacy, essentially helping them build businesses and wealth that would outlive them. And I do this specifically by helping with succession planning strategies and techniques, facilitating meetings within the family so they can distill what's the vision for this enterprise? What are our values? What's our mission? What's our compelling purpose to stay together as a family in building an enterprise that would move from lifetime to legacy? Also coach and advise the next generation, specifically in areas of executive team, executive leadership, like an executive coach specifically dedicated for family enterprises, assisting and guiding them with building siblings team partnerships. Because quite often we know how it is to be siblings with our brothers and sisters, but not necessarily know how to be business partners. And we really want to have created a cadence and a rhythm and a flow and a pattern of being partners during the lifetime of mum and dad, such that when the inevitable happens, we are able to co-lead and be business partners effectively. So those are the areas of how I assist my clientele.
So, Nika, how did you end up in this field? Because it's a very specific niche, it's a very narrow focus
Indeed.
in business and in that cross section of business and family. So, how do you even find yourself in something like this in this career?
Great question. I always say that I didn't find it, it found me. And I had a very My first-hand experience in this space was what led me to where I am here. So I was born into an enterprising family. My father started off our family enterprise the year I was born specifically. And we have three operating businesses in construction, in real estate development, and in infrastructure engineering. I started off my career never contemplating working in the family enterprise. So my family enterprise is back in Lagos in Nigeria. At age 9, myself, my mum, and my brothers, we moved to the UK. So I saw my life in the UK. So all that while, dad was back in Nigeria building out the business, and started off my career in accountancy in the city of London with my sexy job, and but I just found it very hollow, and
Yeah.
it just wasn't connecting with who I was. And I just found myself remember having a conversation with my dad and saying, I really want to just explore more of the world. And I think I'd like to come to Nigeria just for a few months and learn more about the businesses and just have a different perspective. And maybe that will inspire me to know what I want to do with my life. And essentially, to cut a long story short, that 3-month invitation extended to a 10-month stint in the family enterprise. And I firsthand navigated the challenges of being a successor and trying to lead with your family, trying to navigate moving this enterprise into the future, while thinking about the tactical 90-day, 12-month challenges, but also trying to project to the 30-year, 100-year vision. Whilst navigating generational differences in the workplaces, generational differences in perspectives, cultural clashes, and things like that. And so, unfortunately, back in Lagos in Nigeria, there weren't many experts or coaches to assist me through my my evolution in the space, and I found myself self-teaching. So I plugged into networks and trained up as a certified family business advisor to help my family through the succession and the governance, and realized that actually there were so many successors like myself that were stuck and really needed help in unlocking their potential so that they could see their families and their enterprises move into the future and really become future proofed. Because the continued success of the enterprise is not just lining the pockets of the family, which is great to provide financial security, but really has huge impacts on society, huge impacts on the economy and on communities, particularly where I'm from in Africa, where we have such a high rate of poverty and we have such a great extent of social and economic challenges on the continent. And so that was what led me into the space. And yeah, that's how I got dunked into this world of family enterprise, and I just love it.
Yeah, because I never, you see your big conglomerates or your big global, ubiquitous companies that are everywhere, the IBMs, the Coca-Colas, and all that. So you're so used to them always being there, but you don't really think about even at that level. But those are like functioning machines. They're just so they're big, but you don't really think about what goes into the family enterprise. Like just in reading your
Mm,
bio when we spoke before, maybe I just took that for granted. Maybe it was just kind of like, the business is the business, it's the machine, and the family will just be here to, and it's not even being naive or disrespectful, but you just think of it as a well-oiled machine. But times are
mm,
changing so much.
mm,
Before you may have had generational differences, meaning within the family. Um,
mm,
but then you think about what culture looks like from one generation to the next when your father started the company to what it is
mhm,
now. And that to me is like the most fascinating part or piece that I just never even, I knew it was there, but I didn't really think about it until you laid it out, where it's a completely different world, from initiation, from implementation, from the founding of a company to when its first founder passes on and leaves it on, or
mhm,
when you've talked about just envisioning me now, seeing it now, when you've said when we're gone, when
mm,
everybody, even the youngest person is gone, what is this entity going to be? So that's fascinating to me, just what goes into it and what kind of specialization goes into understanding human dynamics,
mm,
relationships, just to make sure that you put the tools in place where it's not going to blow up if you get, not your family, but one bad actor or one person that's not, whose heart isn't really into it.
mm. You've really hit the nail on the head, and I feel like you're a succession specialist in training from everything you said. there are so many moving parts. But firstly, I want to address something you said, and really is over 70% of the GDP today is really run by family owned enterprises. But it's really not apparent to the eye because, like you kind of alluded to, we do tend to focus on the machine side of the things, like the
Like, you see the
business.
brand more
You see the
than.
brand, but you don't think
Yes.
about that there's a family behind it. And think about Walton, the Walton family, Walmart. Think about the Chick-fil-A. Um, their name has completely skipped me right now. But think about BMW, Ferragamo, like Gucci. So many household names and brands are family-owned enterprises, and so it's really important that we appreciate that it's not just the systems, the procedures, and the processes, but also it's the relationships, it's the dynamics, it's the conflicts, it's the traumas, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's amazing that you say traumas as well, just because
Mm,
it's not, it's business, it's about success, it's about growing, it's about creation, but it's not all beautiful. Like anything
exactly.
else, you probably see more hiccups than anything that's fluid and straightforward, right?
For sure. But unfortunately, in our society, there's only room and space for us to put forward this veneer of the success and, the beasting it without really appreciating that actually trauma has a place in actually bringing something beautiful in the family and in the enterprise, because it's through these so-called failures and so-called hardships that we learn so much, and intergenerationally as well. Consider for instance, if granddad immigrated to the US from and was a refugee and started a business in the US and took the business from literally went from water to wine and went through such difficult circumstances and navigating cultural changes, bootstrapping, doing fulfilling multiple roles with his spouse or his brothers and sisters and things like that. And the lessons that can be learned from that and passed on to the next generation in how to overcome hardship, how to be resilient through difficult times. And we flash forward to 2020, where the whole world comes to a standstill and we're going through this collective trauma. And we can reflect on our history as a family, and we can sit through what are the lessons we can learn from the last time that we went through trauma and hardship. How did we pull through, and how can we pull through today, and what's different? I just think that it provides this depth and richness of wisdom, knowledge, experiences that we can really draw on as we move into the future. Because I feel like the younger generation, I'm one of us, we do tend to be very averse towards hardship and difficulty, right?
Oh yeah,
And
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm a kid of immigrants, and my parents never had a business, or they did, but it didn't work out. But just in hearing the stories of kids, or friends that were kids of immigrants, and just hearing those stories in general, you can find them, in many places. You hear about the fight that immigrants had to put in. Like, these were people that left everything they knew in their country, everything that was comfortable, everything that was known, to go. I can't imagine getting on a boat and crossing, the other way, the Atlantic, saying, I don't know what I'm going to find, but I hear great things. And it's just a different mentality, when it's an immigrant generation and what they put into it, or regardless of whether it's not, whether it is or isn't an immigrant situation, maybe somebody that comes from nothing, that was born here, and they kind of break that cycle of not having anything, in order to build something. So, I mean, you see those
Mm,
cases all over the place, and I'm always curious about how it can change from one generation, because you had somebody that did have that hunger, did have that drive, was had
mm,
maybe had their backs up against the wall, and then they built
mm,
something so grandiose, and then maybe that the spark, the fire that initiated it, how do you make sure that that's there for that next generation, that whether that next generation still has it, or you have to, I don't know, bring somebody else on to carry that flame. And you always want to make sure with the business, obviously, that
mm,
you don't want it to just stay like this. You want it to continue growing. So yeah, what I'm curious about, what that
mm.
looks like in terms of that initial generation who has that fire. How do they carry that on? I mean, how do you even, you don't have to have the answer now, but I wish I could
No,
just
I
see through
have I
your
have an
eyes.
interesting perspective on
Oh,
that.
okay, please, please.
I think it's important to note that the next generation intrinsically are different from the first generation. They haven't been subjected to the same life circumstances and traumas and hardships, so to speak, going from a life of humble beginnings and having to take immense risk and create something that never was there and traversing, travailing across halfway across the world. And but similarly, but in spite of that, the fact that they are distinct from the prior generation, there's still opportunity to learn and share. Quite often, what we
Absolutely.
see is the first generation may feel like that hardship, that trauma, it might still be very painful for them to even get their heads around. And it's not necessarily something to be shared to the family. What's to be shared is the upside of the business. We created this business, put food on the table for you, John and Nika. We created this business to give you a better future, but we're not talking through the process through which the circumstances through which we overcame, the challenges that we overcame to create that very business, to transfer that knowledge and expertise and that wisdom to the next generation. And in the industry, there are a couple of thought leaders, Jim Grubman and Dennis Jaffe, that have actually described this generational differences and likened it to this metaphor of being immigrants. So immigrants will come over to a new country and really hold on to the values and the cultural elements from their home countries that brought them to where they are. And they want to infuse those same elements in the next generation. And they're watching their next generation assimilate, and they're really fearful that, my goodness, John is becoming a version that we don't even recognize. He's becoming so Americanized. Like, who is he? And it's from a place of fear.
Mm,
Meanwhile, John was born into a different world. He was born into a world of wealth, a world of security. He is not a risk taker, right? But he has his new challenges of assimilating and his fears of losing all that mom and dad have built up and taking immense risk. He's more risk averse. So it's really navigating this mindset of the immigrant and the mindset of the native to wealth.
yeah.
That is really key. Yeah.
I can just imagine what goes into it. That's incredible. So
Mm,
when it comes to you, you gave us a little bit about your background, having moved to the UK with your father staying behind to build out the enterprise.
mm,
And I typically ask what from your past led you to the field that you're in, and you gave us a little bit of that. But
mm,
I mean, it's not just it's is it or what percentage of it is seeing what your father had built and being impressed by that? And what percentage is it of just, I don't know, your nature, things you might have learned, lessons you might have learned? What is it that if you can parse out from being in the business with your father, taking on that stint, that temporary stint, right?
mm,
What is it from your nature? What is it that you picked up from your past that leads you to say, "I'm gonna help this family continue this legacy"?
mm,
What is it that stands out from your childhood aside from your dad and the importance of the family business? Is there anything in your
mhm.
personality or lessons you saw as a kid that kind of say, "Okay, it makes sense that I'm in this field"?
Oh, for sure. I mean, gift of hindsight is like 2020 vision, isn't it? And when I look back, so I grew up in Nigeria till age 9, then moved to the UK, and I was there all through till I was 24. And I remember moving to the UK, and it was in that you know, transition to the UK that my eyes opened to the extent of lack in Nigeria, the extent of poverty in Nigeria. So I would visit home, and I was just taken aback by just how destitute so many people were, how reliant they were on handouts, how they couldn't have their basic needs met. And I just felt a very righteous anger towards that and just felt that it was very wrong. And all through my teens, I was very passionate about economic development of the continent and seeing how can we propel and move the continent forward in a very sustainable way so we can have growth top line of the countries and the nations and the continent, but also in a way that it affects John and Nika in a sustainable way, and grows their wealth really from a depth perspective and also from a time, so generationally.
Hmm.
And whilst at university, I studied economics. I thought I wanted to work for your World Banks and your IFCs to work in policy and, like government to government policy and things like that to help with economic development. But it was really when I moved back to Nigeria, that 3 month stint I had with my dad, that the penny dropped and I saw the link between entrepreneurship and development. I saw that entrepreneurship was perhaps a better way to impact on the communities and ecosystems than from a policy perspective, because guess what? Entrepreneurs create so much value. It's not just about the profit and the money on the table that they make. It really is about the value that they add to their economies and their societies and the jobs that they create, sustainable jobs, for directly in their employees, through their vendors, and also through the philanthropic activities that they engage in. And that was when I was like, oh, okay. So it seems like that dream that I had been nurturing in my heart to see how can we move more sustainably, economically as a nation, was very much linked to this newfound passion of family enterprise. And I just became very captivated with, we need to look as to how can we help more families move from lifetime to legacy, because back in Nigeria, unfortunately, only 2% of business owners would successfully move their family enterprises from the first gen to the second gen. If we can improve that statistic, that would have a great impact on the economy and also on society and community. So for me, I think it was that this having this life of being at the intersection of cultures has given me
Hmm.
a unique insight into the way I see problems and the way I see solutions. Had I not lived in the UK, I'm not sure I would have this. Um, I probably would be more desensitized towards the extent of poverty, right? And
It would have been just kind of like the world that, Nigeria was. It would have been the extent of what
exactly.
you saw.
Exactly. And working in Deloitte as well, we had clients that were family businesses in the UK that were like 14th generation, 16th generation. So I had a model of possibility that perhaps had I been on the ground in Nigeria, I would just have never perceived,
Yeah.
unforeseen that this was possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's powerful when you can get outside of your environment. And many of us, yeah, do go to university or, we move around, but a lot of people just stay wherever they are,
Mm.
and there's nothing wrong with that. Not everybody needs that particular calling to change the world, but you can see the difference when somebody remains where they are and don't really look outside versus
Hmm.
somebody who has the opportunity to go abroad the way you did with your family, grow up somewhere else. But you make a good point, just pointing out that if you had remained in Nigeria, your story probably would have been still great,
Different.
Nika,
Yeah.
still great, but yeah, very different, very different. Because maybe you
Yeah.
probably wouldn't have had the type of education that you
Exactly.
got with the economics, and then you wouldn't have seen the disparate state of the two countries. So, um, yeah, I'm glad you took that path and can find this particular calling.
Thank you. Thank you.
So when it comes to, let's jump into your book. If you could introduce the book that we're going to be discussing, that'd be great.
The book we'll be discussing is my book that I've authored and will be, as you mentioned, will be going live on the 21st of June, and it's called Lifetime to Legacy. And it really is, how can families move their businesses from lifetime businesses to legacy businesses, exploring not the technical elements like we've kind of alluded to, like strategic business planning and systems and processes, or estate and tax planning and wealth planning, but exploring what I believe is the foundation, and that is the relationships, the intricate relationships within the family. How can we connect better, collaborate, have communicate better, have joint clarity, so that we can jointly co-create businesses of the future? Because I believe that you were kind of speaking to this and alluding to this. I believe that we are in a different age to our parents were. The extent of disruption that we are facing in our world is just wild compared to 30 years ago, someone that was trying to build a generational business,
Mhm.
right? Think through COVID and everything that happened and will continue to happen. And these disruptions will come in different forms. And I believe it's even more crucial today that we are able to foster diversity of thought. And how best than an institution that I believe has unrivaled advantages in diversity of thought. We have natural age diversity in families, and we have natural gender diversity in families. How can we draw upon that and start to come together and
Great
communicate
point.
better? Yeah,
Great point.
collaborate better um, in steering the ship of the enterprise such that it sails successfully into the future. And it's not necessarily that all the members of the family will be on the front line, right? All working as executive directors in the family business. They may not be. Actually, they may not even be on the front line at all. And yeah, sorry, you're
No,
gonna
no,
ask
no,
something.
go ahead. No, I was just going to ask,
Mm,
if in the book you gave examples, maybe not naming names of organizations or the families, but if you gave examples of what the different relationships look like in your experience, whether it's with clients or not, because I'm always curious about the stories in
mm,
general of anybody,
mm,
but especially now hearing you talk more and more about all these factors that go into it.
mm,
um, which families were relatively seamless, where that kind of progression made sense to work on it, and then where it might have been just all out miscommunication, misfiring, infighting, whatever it may be. If there were examples of kind of that spectrum of
mm.
that progression forward for families in their enterprises.
Yeah, so I gave a few examples inspired from families that I've consulted with and things, particularly on when we have weak linkages in the family and how it can stop the family from moving from lifetime to legacy. And also, there's been a robust, extensive study by a couple of thought leaders in the industry on families that have successfully moved their enterprises beyond 100 years, looking across 24 countries. And the key themes that one finds across these families. And it's that they focus on not just they move from being a family business to being an enterprising family. And that really is just being more intentional, thoughtful, professional in the way they govern both the business and the family, in the way they are really intentional about the human capital, developing the human capital of the family, and demanding for higher levels of professionalism from the family members, thinking through things like who is eligible to work in the business. It's not a free for all because we have a certain last name, right? And they're very thoughtful about ensuring that they create a mechanism that every generation adds something new to the enterprise. So whether it's developing a new business line or a new investment or a new joint venture or expanding into a new geography, to keep growing renewing the entrepreneurial nature of the family enterprise. Because if you think about it, the family will probably grow faster than the business because families grow at exponential rates. You've got siblings, you pair off and then have kids. They may then have divorces and then have blended families. And, you know, families grow much faster than an enterprise. And
Yeah.
that dynamic in itself can create opportunities for conflict within the family because the resources that are coming to the family are not the same as they were previously, a previous generation. So there's a lot that goes into building, going from lifetime to legacy. But like I alluded to, I believe that the foundation that we have to get is how we need to get organized as a family. We need to be very intentional and thoughtful about pursuing joint clarity of our vision, our mission, our values, communicating and collaborating.
So Nika, what does your book look like? You don't have to go into detail or page by page, but what is kind of like the arc of the book? How is it you
Mhm,
walk your reader through what that experience is like,
mhm,
of working in this particular field with these particular families, to get to that point where they do have that legacy, beyond who's here now?
mhm, mhm. So, because I'm a business owner, I know that families and business owners are very busy. And so I wrote a book that I would be inspired to read. And so it's not an academic book, it's very practical and very entertaining, so to speak, lots of stories of real life examples, or at least disguised identities naturally for confidentiality, but
Hmm.
just so folks can see themselves in the people that I'm talking about. And so it's very practical and implementable. But the kind of arc, like you kind of alluded to, is we talk through what are the common mistakes that family business owners tend to make and how can we overcome them. um why is it why is it that a generational transition isn't automatic? Like, what are the nuances that we see in family businesses specifically compared to non-family businesses, right? um I really dive deep because of my African experience and my expertise on the situation on the continent particularly, and why I believe that actually African families have an advantage in terms of the way we've been governing our families to actually move successfully into the future, and why it's so hard for business owners to let go of their business, and how they grapple, how we can support them on their exit journey, why it's so hard for next gens to grab on to the business and champion change, and why it's critical that we build connected families that have joint clarity, communicate, and collaborate, and how to go about doing that. So that's really the journey that I take the readers through.
So when I read your bio, I mentioned next gens. You just mentioned it. So what's the definition for next gens like? Is it just those that come after? Is it
Indeed.
specifically targeting, the first generation that's coming after, or setting in motion? And it might be a mix of all these, but what does next gens mean?
Yeah, and next gen just means just not the founding gen, the subsequent generations. And in particular in this book, because I'm speaking to, because my audience have struggled to navigate moving past generation one, most will be generation, when I'm speaking to next gens, most will be generation two or generation three. And the specific challenges that they're facing, a lot of them at this point by G2, probably millennials, grown up in a very different world, very globally minded, very in tune with seeking justice and what have you, very multicultural, because a lot of them have been schooled abroad, and then when they come back into the family enterprise, they're bringing new world views, and there's tends to be cultural clashes in the family enterprise, wanting to infuse more technology, wanting to see more sustainability, wanting to do things in a new way, but maybe facing resistance from the older generation. The book, like I mentioned, is really niche and targeted towards moving your business from G1 to G2 and beyond. But there's a lot of value and wisdom that someone in G2, G3, G4 can take away as a next generation.
I mean, I don't even have. Yeah, I have my business, and maybe I should think of it as an enterprise. I will from now on. But
Mm,
even not being in that kind of situation where I have parents that have launched an enterprise where I feel I would need the book, even standing outside of that niche, I'm curious because I think all those lessons are transferable. So yeah,
indeed.
you're not going to have the finance, you're not going to have the management processes, but just and you don't want to overthink family. But it was funny when you mentioned before talking about family dynamics and what goes into them and considering, who brings what to the table, the diversity of it. And
Mm,
I think as families, we kind of just exist. We go forward, we help each other. There's the good and the bad, but we don't think about really harnessing what each of us does best. So I'd be interested to read it, even though I'm outside your niche. I'd be
mhm.
interested to read it just because of, yeah, just the psychological pieces that are at play, the relational pieces that are at play, and kind of tapping into your resources, which is not just capital, but human capital as well. So
Indeed.
I would pick it up just out of that relational aspect that you've broken down for us.
No, for sure. I think you've kind of alluded to something, and that is we are typically very intentional in the way we approach our enterprises. In our governing, in our team
Mm.
management, but not necessarily in a family setting. The family setting is a bit different. It's really relying on family members for emotional support and unconditional love, but not necessarily about being intentional about what does John bring to the table, what does Nika bring to the table, how can we, what is our joint shared vision, what is compelling enough for both of us to jump out of bed and jump to this, and how are we meshing together as a team, right? And if we can just apply that same kind of rigor and intentionality that we take in the workplace with our team colleagues to our families. Bearing in mind, in a family, it's a lot more what's the word, dynamic, and
Mm.
things can set off a lot faster because it's emotions are involved, right? But I just think the message of the book really is get organized and be intentional about communicating, collaborating, and gaining clarity with your family members.
Look at that. I turned your book into a parenting book. But, that's not even tongue in cheek because, I mean, what comes up in these conversations that I have on this series is just the state of the world. No
Mm,
matter what the topic of the book is that I'm covering, generational differences always seems to come into play. I asked that question. Obviously, it comes into play because I asked that question, what made you who you are? Where do you come from? Was it your parents, your education? Um, so because we talk about generations, we get to talking about how things are today, how
mm,
people, there's a lot of mental health issues, obviously global pandemic, the proliferation of social media and instant connection and instant gratification, and what it does to kind of our personalities and our society. So, I mean, I think this idea helps steer the ship in the right direction. You're not going to nail
mm,
it every time, but at least it seems to give you the tools to get in that mindset. Like
mm,
like we've said, you and I have both said, it's a business book built on that foundation of moving in the same direction. So even though in the family you're not going to have profit and loss statements necessarily, you're not going to have to worry about strategy or joint ventures or anything like that. I think there is something to be said about just recognizing where you are as a family. Like, what is our legacy going to be? What are we
mm,
working towards? So that families, for the most part, we have our lessons for our kids or whatever, but we're very reactive. It's like, okay,
mm,
now gas is up through the roof. Now we got to react to that. So where's that money going to come from? How are we going to do this? Groceries are getting more expensive, blah, 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 blah. So we think about those reactive things, but it'd be cool for me to start thinking about my not my legacy, but my family's legacy.
mm,
What is it that we're going to stand for? How are we going to keep those lessons going? Um, Guarding against that kind of if I'm trying to share a great lesson with my son and my sons and my daughter, that they live upon those enough that they find the value in them, that they're not going to say, well, I'm going to pass this along because my old man says it, but no,
mm,
because he's shown me, he's given the example of how it can make us happy and benefit others. So without even having seen the book or the table of contents, I'm already curious enough to want to read it because I think there are just so many parallels that you can
mm.
draw.
Mm, for sure, for sure. The relational side of just life, whether parenting or in business, I feel has been really undervalued and overlooked in society at large. Mm,
Oh, absolutely. I'm realizing that more and more. So that's why I find that importance of, yeah, even adding your book to this arsenal of tools of just moving the right kind of message. We're not going to get it perfect, but the right intention behind what we
mm.
do. So Nika, how long have you been thinking about writing this book? Like how far were you into your career before you started kind of kicking the idea around of writing your own book?
So I thought of writing this book 12 months ago. I think I got started, no, maybe 13 months ago. It was around May last year that I was like, I have a message in me and I want to get it out into the world. And that was really preceded by so many families, in the work that I do, I'd be approached by either three groups of people: a founder that was anticipating letting go, retiring, or selling the business, but there was literally no one around him or her, in terms of the next generation, whether literally or metaphorically, weren't really interested in the future of the enterprise because they really hadn't coalesced and collaborated on it in
Hmm.
the past. And it was, I want to move this into the future. How do I go about doing this? Or the next generation, I was often approached by them who watch mom and dad built this successful business and they're thinking, what's next? And how can I add to the table and add value in areas of like technology or structuring or strategic planning or, setting up a council or philanthropy or what have you, but just literally didn't know how to get a word in with their parents. And then the last set were non-family staff or advisors that were kind of felt like do I have the right name to succeed in this enterprise? Is there really a future for me? And if there is, how can I navigate these interesting dynamics where I watch my boss and family members, for instance, fight in the workplace, and how do I deal with that? How do I deal with the perceived from my side ceiling to my success and things like that? And I realized that whilst every family was very different and every business was different, there were just
Mhm.
so many commonalities and similarities between these families. And the lessons that could be learned could be digested into a book. Um, Now, not everyone would be ready to have an external consultant come in and design something very bespoke for them. But there were loads of folks that were just seeking for a resource that they could read and they could then start to think through, like you've kind of alluded to. There's so many moving parts in this whole world of legacy planning and legacy enterprise. Start to sow the seeds in their minds and start to change, debunk a lot of myths that they've held about how to build. Firstly, is it possible to build a multi-generational enterprise on a continent like Africa? Secondly, what does it really entail? It's not just about the tax planning and the wealth planning and a trust, but it's also the relational elements. And thirdly, getting them to start to get themselves organized. And then if they need an external consultant, then that's great. And so, yeah, I decided I was going to write it about 12, 13 months ago. And I thought it'd be very simple, right? Because I've been writing blogs for 4 or 5 years, and it's easy for me to just churn out 1,000 words. Like it's not that hard. And I was like, okay, this is who I'm planning to. This is who this message is for. These are the key messages of the book, and just get onto it, girl. And we'll get this party started. And I was like, it's just like writing 50 articles that are 1,000 words. No,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
not.
yeah, yeah.
It's not. It's not at all. It's a lot of work that goes into a book. Getting very clear on who the book is for, why you're writing it, and organizing your message in a very coherent and logical way that takes the reader on a journey that they want to keep reading and they want to keep getting value. And then also balancing between this academic side, teaching the reader, but also the practical side, guiding and coaching the reader. Yeah, it's been probably the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's been the most fulfilling thing I've ever done. Like it's been, when you start something, you have so much zeal and energy and passion, and you kind of hit a dip in the middle where you're like, how in the world am I going to get through this? Like
Uh,
the messy middle, like
yeah,
how am
yeah.
I? And you have to like motivate yourself and remember to keep being consistent. So I'm just so glad I made it to the other side, and I have my physical copy, which is here right now. So,
Let me see. Let me
just
see. Put it up. Let me see.
can you see?
Nice. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's got to be an amazing feeling when you get
It
that
is. It
copy in the
was.
mail and
It was. It was like, oh my goodness, this is real. This isn't just like a Microsoft Word thing, right?
yeah.
And then you see like the landing page on your website and you see it on Amazon. You're like, oh my gosh, I am an author. Like,
Yeah,
this
good
is
for
real.
you. That's absolutely
Yeah.
amazing.
Thank
So
you.
I always ask those who have written their own books that come on this series with me, what kind of lessons did you take away from the writing process? And I mean, you shared a little about that journey, the ups and downs. You're like, okay, what am I doing? Go back to remember why you started. But what kind of lessons, maybe did you look at the topic differently? I'm assuming you may have learned something new about the field just in doing some research, but how did it change you? What did you take away from putting out your book?
Oh gosh, it changed me. I realized the gaps in my thinking and in my expertise in the process of writing the book. And so, like you kind of alluded to, doing more research and just, yeah, I just feel like I understand my field so much better. And it also made me a lot more disciplined. I had to get very focused because initially in the first draft, I was like writing 10 books and 10 different messages. Like, yes, we're talking about gender, we're talking about, injustice, and we're talking about leadership, and we're talking about this, and we're talking about, I had to get very, very focused on who specifically is this for, and what is the value I want them to take away from this? And anything that is, not key on the bullseye with that is perhaps another book, and take it out. And it was hard because these were like, I thought they were really well written parts and really like poetic and really stylistic, but
I mean,
just,
you saved them somewhere, right?
yeah, of course.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Yeah.
Of
You're like, this
course.
this is too good to throw
This
out.
is
I'm
too
I'm gonna keep
good,
yeah.
right? Um, but it's really getting very focused in what is of true service to my audience, and just nothing more, nothing less.
Yeah.
And then being consistent, being so consistent, just showing up even on the days where I was like, gosh, my brain's not working, I can't do this today, but just showing up nonetheless. Because in the initial stages, I wrote this book really intensely. So for about a month, I had like 4 hours a day in my diary. So
Wow.
yeah, so 2 hour blocks each day, every weekday. So the first 10 days were fine, and then I hit in the middle I was just like, oh gosh, I don't think I have it in me to write anymore. But what I found helped with my consistency was discipline. And I found that on the days where I struggled to with my mindset towards like other areas of my life, like exercising, tended to be the same days where I give myself many excuses as to why I wasn't going to
Mm.
write that day. And so I started pairing up um, exercising with writing in my mind. Um, as focused as I need to be to exercise, as focused as I need to be to write. And I found that the more focused I was and more, about it with my exercise, the better I was about showing up with my writing. And I found that exercising as well actually helped my writing. Because whilst I was running and just had a break, I would have so many ideas. Like things would just pop in my mind. I'm like, I need to research this. I need to write about this. There was that client that did this. You know,
And what would you do? Make notes like in your phone while you're working
yeah,
out?
make notes in my phone whilst I run. So whilst running, and then it's on my to-do list for the next day to do some research or to unpack it, and in the book write about it. Just get it out of my mind.
Yeah. Get it out
Um,
onto the page.
get it out onto the page. And lastly, the hardest part of writing the book was feedback.
Oof. Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, because you feel naked, literally. So I had an editor, and I had a coach and a guide as well. And I had um, about 6 people that read the book through and gave their feedback. It was hard, but it made the book so much better. So much better.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So you reference it yourself and you took these poetic pieces out, but what do you think might be next for I know here I am, it's not even out yet. This one's out, but what just in general, what are you thinking about the future for your writing? Are there any areas that you would want to focus on, a follow up to this one? What would you consider writing about later? Now that you have that
I
writing
think
bug.
I'm not sure I do, John. I'm not
You
sure.
will, you will. You'll have it
I
for 2 weeks and it'll go away.
Yeah, so a friend of mine, she was like, "Oh, it's like children, like when you have your first child, you're like, oh, I'm done. I'm not having another one." And then they turn two, and you're like, "Oh, you get the itch. Like, I think it's time for the next one." I was like, "I'm not quite there yet, so we'll see."
Well, yeah, because I think you're
Um,
starting to see their little personality come out, and you're like, okay,
come
the hard
out,
work that we
yeah,
put in, now we're seeing the fruit of our labor,
yeah.
literally. So I figure it's like the same thing.
I think it is, and I do think it will happen in the future, and I'm honestly open towards it in the future, but not now. But because I'm a podcast host and I love podcasting, I want to do an audio version and also explore how can I disseminate the message on my
Mm,
podcast in different ways. Um, that would be an area that I'd really love to do. Um, so yeah, I'm honestly quite open to what the future holds. If someone had told me 2 years ago that I would write a book, I would have said, "You're crazy." So who knows? I could get inspiration next year and write another book in a year.
good for you. I mean, I know you're at least the third author that I've had in this series that their books were written during the pandemic.
Mm,
There was this slowdown in the world. slowdown in our lives where there was a little more time. So you were motivated by your field and what people were kind of what they were missing out on, information you
Yeah.
could provide. But the slowdown in the world, a little silver lining is that it gave us all a little more time to kind of focus on ourselves and what we wanted. So it's amazing to see the authors that I've talked to and what they've put out during the pandemic. So, kudos to all of you for not having I guess wasted that time, but I wish I
Mm.
had done the same, but kudos to all of you who actually did do it.
It's never too late if you want to.
Yeah, I will get there at some point. Nika, why don't you tell us a little more about your podcast as well?
Yeah, so the Connected Generation podcast is we explore all things legacy wealth and legacy businesses, how to build businesses and wealth that would outlive the founders and have sustained impact, not just only over time, so generationally, but also what I say over space. So
Mhm.
having an impact in the world as it stands. And it really is a safe space. It's a place of authenticity, of vulnerability, and we come at conversations with curiosity, having guests from all over the world. So business owners, so some legacy business owners as well, some first gen business owners as well, philanthropists, as well as expert teachers in the world of legacy. So speaking on from navigating siblings relationships to conflicts or divorces or parenting, whilst building a business or navigating grief. So we talk on
Oof.
everything that encompasses being a legacy business owner and trying to navigate how to do that, yeah, in the 21st
Yeah, you've
century.
you've opened my eyes to really how much goes into it. I
Hmm.
just always looked at it as a well-oiled machine, something that
It's
continued
not.
like that for generations. But then, I mean, most of the ones that I see aren't family run.
Mm.
They were founded and then, corporate boards took them over and now there aren't really family members in them. But when it comes to the ones that are family driven, I took for granted what that dynamic looks like behind the scenes to really get it to that point. So thank you for sharing all of that with me.
No worries at all.
Is there anything else that in wrapping up, is there anything else that you want to share aside, obviously, from the book and the podcast? Anything else that you want to speak about?
Yeah, I've got sample chapters if anyone's keen to just get a peek of the book on my website, and that's on www.nikaanani.com/book. So you can scroll and have a read of what I term as the key success factors of legacy families, and that's three C's: gaining clarity, having communicating and collaborating. And I just give an overview of what that should look like. And also on that same site, you can there's a link to the Amazon page, and you can place an order for your copy. So thank you.
Amazing. Just because again, it's not something that I guess because it didn't impact me, I didn't know what went into it, but just everything that you shared today really provides some insight into the commitment that goes into it. Because I've heard family stories, the good, the bad, where one person put everything into it, some immigrant, another one not. The examples that I have in my head, where the next generation kind of was kind of half there. Another generation and another family was all in. So it's amazing to see that kind of diverse dynamic that's out there of things that obviously we don't see behind the scenes, but ideas that you can share in your book. So thank you for sitting down for this conversation, Nikia.
Thank you so much, Sean. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
And Nika's book is Lifetime the Legacy, a New Vision for Multi-Generational Family Businesses. It'll be out on the 21st of this month. And when I share this episode across social media, on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and LinkedIn and whatnot, I'll include the links. If there's anything that I should have asked Nika, just let me know. We're always limited on time, and I don't think of all the questions that I should get to, that I should ask. And even when I listen to this back later, before posting it, I'm always like, I should have asked that. But if there is anything that you think I should have asked, just let me know. Reach out to me or reach out to her herself, to see if Nika can answer any questions that you might have. This is a new field for me. I'm not that curious about it, but I'll definitely be getting that book just for that, the parallel aspect of real life family dynamics and just moving your legacy and your message and what you stand for later, uh, into your family's future. So, again, thank you to everybody for listening and watching. And until the next episode, see you soon. Bye.